CBS mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Is this a date or we just friends?
Here we are, your favorite morning people.
CBS mornings, starting at 7.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
Energy! It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
President of the United States.
This was President Biden's first address to a divided Congress.
2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs.
Last night's speech was one of the rowdiest State of the Union addresses in recent history, with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy actually shushing members of his own party at least 4 times.
Some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority.
The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal or crazy.
It is the day after the State of the Union, and the rhetorical dust is still settling here in the nation's capital. As you are probably aware, there was a rather lively conversation between the president and some members of the audience within the House chamber about Social Security and Medicare. The president made statements. There were howls of protest, and the consensus, for whatever it's worth, is that the president, by and large, won the moment. Winning moments in State of the Union addresses is no small feat. But the future of Social Security and Medicare, that's serious business. The Social Security Trust Fund due to reach a point of insolvency in 2035. The Medicare part that pays for hospital expenses, that's supposed to go insolvent in 2028. Extending both programs is serious and hard policy and political business. So whatever you thought about the histrionics last night, it shed very little light on the policy and the politics of those hard decisions to come. Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Thanks so much for joining us. President Biden traveled to Wisconsin today, touting his economic agenda after that aforementioned State of the Union address that was probably laying some groundwork for a possible bid for re-election. The evening, as I've mentioned, broke with tradition. Republican lawmakers at points heckled the president. Mr. Biden highlighted his administration's achievements and urged bipartisan cooperation. The president's Wisconsin trip is one of 2 post-State of the Union stops planned for this week. For more on this, Scott McFarland and Weijia Jiang join me now. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Weijia, of course, CBS News senior White House correspondent. Scott, let me start with you. You were in the chamber. Your takeaways.
Not only were the disruptions more frequent, they were more animated. They had more volume to them. They had more theater to them. And it's not that it's surprising considering the nature of our political discourse at this moment, Major, but it's almost like the mission of the State of the Union address has shifted to a statement by the president to a statement by all people who want to be heard in whatever way they can be heard. Are we on a trajectory where the State of the Union becomes more of a, for lack of a better phrase, democratic affair where anybody in the room can have his or her voice heard? We spoke with Debbie Dingell of Michigan about this, saying, were you surprised by what you heard? Were you disappointed by what you heard? And Congresswoman Dingell, loyal Democrat from Southeast Michigan, says she's not surprised, but hopes this isn't becoming normalized, that this isn't setting a precedent. But it's hard to see how we're on a pathway in any other direction. One Republican, Don Bacon of Nebraska, said, well, maybe Republicans are justified in heckling because Nancy Pelosi ripped up Donald Trump's State of the Union on camera. Democrats might want to respond in kind next time there's a Republican president there.
Whataboutism, that is one of our most current forms of political currency in Washington. Weijia, what is the feeling at the White House this day after? Everything I've heard is sense that the White House feels, as I mentioned in the open, President got the better of not just that moment, but many moments, and the speech from their perspective landed well.
Major, here at the White House, the celebration is still ongoing after last night when I received many messages from aides inside who said basically they felt that this was the president's strongest performance since taking office. They were high-fiving each other and clapping during the exchanges that he had with Republicans because they feel that if there were any lingering questions about whether the president had the energy or the sharpness of vintage Joe Biden to launch a re-election campaign, they feel that last night really answered that question. And it showed that, he welcomes this sort of banter, even though it does raise a lot of questions about the decorum in the House chamber. Aides close to the president say, look, his performance spoke for himself because he listened, he entertained, the interjections, and then he reacted in a calm manner that was also spirited, to use a word that I heard. And so they are very happy with the president's performance last night. Now, whether that translates to the American public, who in polls care much more about, his policies than his performance, yet to be seen.
Ouija, did they practice for that in the sense that, Mr. President, it's quite likely you're going to get an earful at moments of your speech, and therefore you need to prepare in kind? Does any sense at the White House that in their weeks of preparations for this, there was something akin to a rehearsal of a moment like that?
I do know that the president rehearsed from a podium his speech a couple times. He ran through it, but I don't have any reporting that indicates, that they were role playing and making sure he would be able to react. I think at the same time, they would point to the fact that, he was in the Senate for so many years and he's used to this sort of, back and forth with colleagues from the other side. So, this isn't something necessarily new for the president. What's new is the venue and, the setting around him.
Scott, real quickly, there was a couple of moments where the Speaker of the House, who had his own difficult time becoming Speaker of the House, felt compelled, knowing he's on camera, you can't escape the camera shot when you're sitting in the Speaker's chair, to shush members of his own conference.
Yeah, with limited ability to actually make that change happen. Those
reflecting also the speakership battle that he had to go through.
Metaphor for everything, isn't it? I mean, he's hamstrung by the fact there are extra cameras in there for the State of the Union address, just like there were extra cameras in there for the House Speaker vote. Anybody who wants to be seen making a scene can be, because there's extra perspectives there for the State of the Union, just like there were for the Speaker vote.
Right. And Ouija, back to you on the president and the sense the White House has over what was achieved on the Social Security, Medicare, back and forth.
Well, the president himself talked about this today in Wisconsin. He said, it seems like we negotiated a deal on the House floor because now that is not only on the record, it is on tape of essentially what felt like a deal because Republicans were insisting that they did not want to cut those entitlements. So today, the president, who was called a liar, by the way, yesterday, pulled out a plan from Rick Scott and said, actually, you can read about the sunset clauses right in here, which of course mean that those programs would fade away, if you will, after a certain amount of years, and they would have to re-vote on them. And so the president is really taking the Republicans for their word, but he also says, I'll believe it when I see it, because, of course, theatrics during a State of the Union address are very different from, as you mentioned earlier, actually, writing legislation. And so I think that, despite what Republicans said last night, of course, they have a lot of work ahead of them, especially because Speaker McCarthy has made so clear that, spending cuts are non-negotiable for his party.
Scott, I want to ask you about something that occurred today. There was a lengthy hearing, I believe, by the House Oversight Committee on the Republican side, on the House side, majority Republicans in charge, on Twitter and the Hunter Biden story. What did we glean from that lengthy conversation and set of questions?
The timing is what I question. This is a day where Republicans wanted to be singing from the same songbook, having a message to counter-argue what the president said. And they staged this hearing criticizing Twitter and Twitter's handling of the Hunter Biden laptop. And it wasn't a musical symphony singing from the same songbook. That hearing was all over the place. There was criticism about how Twitter handled Hunter Biden's laptop, about culture wars. Marjorie Taylor Greene, as we mentioned earlier, who was noticeable in the State of the Union last night, was noticeable at this hearing, complaining about her Twitter account and the handling by the company. The former officials for Twitter who testified today said what they did in 2018, or before the Biden administration began with Hunter Biden's laptop story, was they thought a safety precaution because of what they'd seen in 2016 with disinformation. Take a listen to some more of what they said at this House Oversight Committee hearing earlier today.
In 2020, Twitter noticed activity related to the laptop that, at first glance, bore a lot of similarities to the 2016 Russian hack and leak operation targeting the DNC. And we had to decide what to do. And in that moment, with limited information, Twitter made a mistake.
Major, if you're trying to have this disciplined message, having a congressional hearing with a high profile is not a good way to execute that game plan, because everybody came at it with a different thing they wanted to say, a different argument they wanted to make. And even the Republicans would acknowledge it was a bit muddled and everybody was watching.
And the Twitter files and the conversation today underscored two things. There was disagreement within Twitter about what to do, and that story was frozen for about 24 hours and then replatformed, correct?
Yeah, I think what the Twitter officials would say today, though, is it organically still got around. Some of the Republicans in the room today were socializing that story, even if Twitter was putting a freeze on it.
Understood. Scott McFarlane and Weijia Jiang, thank you so very much. After the speech comes, the spin. Coming up, how both parties are messaging their agendas. I will speak to the Republican National Committee's communications director after this break. You are streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming racism.
I feel like it's just a war zone between all different races.
Will this generation continue the problem?
The kids pushed them away and didn't want them to be there because of their race.
Or be the solution?
We just need to keep raising our voices. We're all human and we don't deserve that type of treatment just because of how we look.
Are the kids all right? Racism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme, CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Weather when it matters most on CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression.
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we
unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be.
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Major Garrett. President Biden's State of the Union address was met with what can only be described as a blistering Republican rebuttal from Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Now, responses like that tend to be on the blistering side of things, so there's nothing particularly unusual about that. But to discuss this in greater detail, I want to bring in Danielle Alvarez. She is the Communications Director for the Republican National Committee. Danielle, it's good to see you. One of the things that Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders said is it's time for a new generation of Republican leadership. That's, if I recall correctly, a direct quote. Is that another way of saying a post-Trump Republican Party?
You know, that wasn't my takeaway from her message. I am part of that new generation of young Republican leaders. And what I took away from her is I could put myself in her shoes as a mom, as a wife, as a working mom especially. And I thought she delivered a very powerful message. It was in stark contrast to the president's State of the Union. And I think you're seeing a lot of these young Republican leaders, not just Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who delivered the rebuttal in English, but I also want to shout out Congressman Juan Ciscomani, who's another young Republican leader, was elected and you know, delivered a stark contrast in the Spanish rebuttal.
Mm-hmm. But that idea of a new generation, does that include President Trump, who is, of course, of a different generation?
I think President Trump is an important part of the Republican Party, and it's clear he has a very strong base. But we also have room for a lot of leaders within our party, and I think that is why we elected such great Republicans across the country in Nevada and South Texas, in my home state of Florida. And I think that all of that together is the reason why we have a House majority, why Speaker McCarthy was sitting behind the president as he delivered his State of the Union. And I think that not just Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her rebuttal, but new young Republicans that are bringing bright ideas to our party and growing our party as a result.
You mentioned Florida. You might have noticed, as many of us did yesterday, kind of a side story to the State of the Union, the former president posting on Truth Social about the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, suggesting he was doing something along the lines of grooming. Do you have any idea what the former president meant by that, or how good this is for the Republican Party writ large?
You know, I was not paying attention to that yesterday. I, like the American public, was focused on the State of the Union and the response from Republicans, as well as Speaker McCarthy's speech the night before on the debt ceiling. So, you know, I think that that's where the focus is of the American people, really focusing on what the path forward and what the future of our union looks like. And the RNC is fully focused on making sure that we retire Joe Biden and we give the White House to Republican control.
And clearly the Republican National Committee is going to pay attention to all those who may or may not run for the party's nomination in 2024. Governor DeSantis is weighing that. That's no secret. But this exchange yesterday, does it not suggest to you at the RNC that the party might be in for some brass knuckle conflicts between the former president and anyone, such as the governor, who might change or to seek to challenge him?
Sure, it's possible. It's possible that we have a broad field of candidates. Part of the RNC bylaws state that we don't get involved in primaries. And I actually think that that's pretty exciting because it means that while we are having discussions and while our candidates are you know, vying for the Republican nomination, we're focused on the nominating calendar on our early states. We are focused on building infrastructure. We're doing voter registration and growing our party. We're opening community centers to bring our message to Black, Asian, and Hispanic communities. And we're building that infrastructure so that we can hand over those keys to our eventual nominee and secure that victory and send Joe Biden packing.
Danielle, you mentioned the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy's talk about the debt ceiling. After the speech last night and the interaction between the president and some members of the House Republican Conference, where do you think things have landed on the question of reducing, in any way, shape, or form, benefits for Social Security and Medicare?
I think that the speaker was pretty clear in his speech the evening before the State of the Union, and he was a pretty good barometer from behind Joe Biden when Joe Biden was telling untruths and lying to the American people. I think that that's why that response was elicited from House Republicans and Senate Republicans during the State of the Union, because it simply isn't true. And it's important to hold the president accountable when he does tell lies and when he is untrue to the American people.
What part was untrue?
That Republicans are not interested in cutting Social Security or cutting Medicare. That was stated by the Speaker, that has been stated by the Republican House Conference, and the president went ahead and repeated those untruths again last night.
Picking up comments made in a different era, but not too long ago, from Rick Scott, among other Republicans. Danielle Alvarez from the RNC, thanks so very much.
Thank you very much.
Last night's speech was a soft launch of a probable Biden 2024 re-election campaign. Coming up, how it harkened back to another speech, what you might find, as I did, a surprising way. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
After decades in the public eye and public service, this mother-daughter duo is now talking about gutsy women.
What's the gutsiest thing you've ever done?
We go person to person with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The middle class has been hollowed out. Once thriving cities and towns that many of you represent became shadows of what they used to be.
One by one, the factories shuttered and left our shores, with not even a thought about the millions and millions of American workers that were left behind.
My economic plan is about investing in places and people that have been forgotten. We're going to buy American. We're going to buy America.
We will follow two simple rules: buy American and hire American.
Buy America has been the law since 1933, but for too long, past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have fought to get around it.
Those were just a few of the similarities between President Biden's State of the Union address last night and former President Trump's inauguration speech in 2017. For more on that, CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me here in D.C. Look, we're not saying the speeches were the same, but what I think is interesting there, Ed, is for the Democratic Party, since 2016, there has been this concerted effort to try to find a way to reclaim the rhetoric of white working-class voters, white non-college educated voters in America. And the statistics are telling for the Democrats. Exit poll data from the 2022 midterm. They lost white non-college voters 66-32. They made up 39% of the voting population. In 2020, Democrats lost them 67-32 to Trump, 35% of the electorate. It seemed to me, listening to that last night, there was an attempt by the White House and the president to reach into some of that language that doesn't sound too far from former President Trump.
And in some ways, Trump had been taking it from Democrats, and that was part of what worked for him in 2016.
And he sort of owned that space for a while. It seems like Democrats are trying to claw it back a little bit.
Because they understand if you're going to lose a place like Florida, let's say going forward, if you have no hope in Ohio, then you've got to make that appeal to voters in Pennsylvania, Ohio, or not, well, Michigan, Wisconsin, and then, New Hampshire and a few others where those voters exist and serve up about a fourth of the, 30% or more of the electorate. And so, yes, this is a concerted effort by a guy who, as he likes to remind us, grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, watched his father struggle the way that many Americans struggle today, and is sensitive to bringing back those voters and saying, this big tent of mine can stretch from urban America, from Latino and black voters, all the way back to those white voters that we used to rely on more.
Exactly. And there was something else last night in the Republican response I want to highlight for both of us. First of all, we're going to listen to what Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor of Arkansas, age 40, new generation Republican leaders, as she said, talked about America and its relationship to culture. And then we're going to play a soundbite from the Republican National Committee convention in 1992 from Patrick Buchanan. Listen to them both carefully.
The Biden administration seems more interested in woke fantasies than the hard reality Americans face every day. Most Americans simply want to live their lives in freedom and peace. But we are under attack in a left-wing culture war we didn't start and never wanted to fight.
Friends, this election is about more than who gets what. It is about who we are. It is about what we believe and what we stand for as Americans. There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself, for this war is for the soul of America.
Ed O'Keefe, I ask you, you heard the same words I heard.
Yeah.
Religious war, culture war, that's 1992. I'm not saying that's the first shot fired, but I think the governor of Arkansas has a hard time saying we didn't start it and we don't want to fight it.
Right. And look, it's working for her, for Ron DeSantis, to some extent in Virginia with Glenn Youngkin. This is a base motivating exercise. It's something that grabs headlines. It stirs the pot. It allows them to look tough on not only the culture wars, but then on education policy and how, police conduct their jobs and whether or not businesses are going to be able to do or say certain things or not do or say certain things. And, she is somebody who's been mentioned as a potential running mate or at least a national factor going forward. And so if she's going to be talking about these kinds of things and implementing a conservative policy agenda, it certainly allows for that. But she's speaking to something that is very popular and very evident right now in Republican politics. What I wonder, if it's so popular on Fox and in the Newsmax and One America space, if you were somebody watching on any other channel last night who doesn't listen to this stuff, doesn't hear about it as often as somebody who's a big fan of Governor Sanders would, what did you make of what she was talking about last night?
And is that something that is front and center for you?
Right.
And it's worth pointing out, Ed, from a historical perspective, the battle lines as Pat Buchanan drew them in 1992 about this religious and culture war were women serving in the military and same-sex marriage. There is now a bipartisan consensus on both. He was saying part of the 92 campaign was fighting against both those things. Well, it would appear if you were a warrior in that culture battle, those battles have been lost.
Right.
And the Republicans keep losing ground on this, but keep fighting with a kind of intensity, rhetorical and otherwise.
But it's moved on to transgender rights.
Right.
It's moved on to abortion rights to some extent, and moved on to what our children are seeing, doing, and being taught generally. That's where we are.
And based on what you saw last night at the State of the Union, how far away do you think the nation is from a official announcement from President Biden?
Still a few weeks
Right.
for this reason. We know that there are Democrats still talking to the White House about what role they might play.
In the campaign?
Yes. I talked to some of them last week in Philadelphia when the Democrats were gathered for their winter meeting, and they said, I'm still waiting to have my meeting about what role I would play in either a campaign or at the DNC or in some kind of super PAC. So while the general intent is there and consensus that he'll do it, it's now down to staffing, timing, and, general themes, and then questions of strategy. How exactly to campaign going forward, knowing that he did it pretty successfully from his basement back in 2020.
Just remember, folks, before you have a re-election campaign, you got to have a meeting. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much. That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a friendly reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of this program, you can see them anytime on CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/red and blue.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone